Tell me when
Live.
we're on. Well, good evening. And God has reminded me that it would be wise for me to remind you all. Tomorrow is Ascension Day, and there will be a new Mass for Ascension Day. It is a very important day in the Church's calendar. It is often not recognized as such, but it is a very significant day. I hope you're all braced for another heavy dose of the Old Testament, because you're going to get it. And it begins right away when Jesus tells this parable. A certain man planted a vineyard and set a hedge about it and digged a place for the wine vat and built a tower and let it out to husbandmen and went into a far country. And at the season he sent to the husbandman a servant that he might receive from the husbandman of the fruit of his vineyard. And they caught him and beat him and sent him away empty. And again he sent unto them another servant. And at him they cast stones and wounded him in the head and sent him away shamefully handled. And again he sent another, and him they killed, and many others, beating some and killing some. Having yet therefore one son, his well-beloved, he sent him also last unto them, saying, They will reverence my son. But those husbandmen said unto themselves, This is the heir, come, let us kill him, and the inheritance shall be ours. And they took him and killed him, and cast him out of the vineyard. What shall therefore the Lord of the vineyard do? He will come and destroy the husbandman, and will give the vineyard unto others. And have you not read this scripture? The stone which the builders rejected is become the head of the corner. This was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Now, the imagery of the vineyard representing Israel is very, very common, but its most explicit statement is in Isaiah, in the 5th chapter. This is what the first 7 verses say. Now will I sing to my well-beloved a song of my beloved touching his vineyard. My well-beloved hath a vineyard in a very fruitful hill. And he fenced it and gathered out the stones thereof, and planted it with the choicest vines, and built a tower in the midst of it, and also made a winepress therein. And he looked that it should bring forth grapes, and it brought forth wild grapes. And now, inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge, I pray you, betwixt me and my vineyard. Isaiah is speaking in the voice of God. Judge between me, that is God. What could have been done more to my vineyard that I have not done in it? Wherefore, when I looked that it should bring forth grapes, brought it forth wild grapes. And now go to, I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will take away the hedge thereof, and it shall be eaten up, and break down the wall thereof, and it shall be trodden down. And I will lay it waste. It shall not be pruned nor digged, but there shall come up briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah his pleasant plant. And he looked for judgment, but behold, oppression. For righteousness, but behold, cry.
Randolph, what chapter in Isaiah is
5.
From the beginning or 5?
Right from the beginning. That's the first 7 verses of Isaiah. So, clearly we have this imagery established that Jesus is picking up on. He talks about the tower and the hedge, and things. Jesus is using all this imagery in his parable. So the parable is pretty easy to understand if you're a first century Jew, or even if you're not, I think. God is the owner of the vineyard. The vineyard is God's covenant people, Israel. And the hedge and the watchtower, well, maybe that's not so obvious. The hedge is the law. It's what separates Judah from, or the Jews from other people. And the watchtower is the prophets. That's also a common imagery in the Old Testament, because the prophet's job is to watch. But what do you use a watchtower for? To watch for enemies approaching, or potential enemies. That's what the prophet does. The prophet warns about potential evil in the future. In Jesus' parable here, there are a lot of things that we resonate with the Jews that we don't necessarily see right away. He let it out to husbandmen and went into a far country. In other words, the master was away. The master was away from his vineyard. Now, one of the things, do you all remember when I told you regarding the sort of Greek worldview that they understood there to have been a succession of ages, gold, silver, bronze, and iron, each of which was worse than the last? And one of the ways that each was worse than the last was that the relationship with the gods got more and more distant with each one. So that in the Bronze Age, the age of heroes, the age of the Iliad, the age of the Odyssey, the gods still met with people, still appeared to them in human form, still spoke with them, still did other things with them as well if they were Zeus. But in the Iron Age, that didn't happen anymore. Well, the Hebrews had a similar idea, but much simpler, in that since God appeared to Moses and spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, he had not done the same since. He had been away for a while. There had been no, what they call theophany, since Mount Sinai. Obviously, the servants that are sent, and some are killed and some are treated shamefully, they're the prophets. And you remember in Jesus' lament over Jerusalem, it is, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, would that you knew the things that made for peace. You have stoned the prophets. So most of a lot of the prophets, the good ones, weren't very popular, and the popular ones weren't very good. Of course, the master's son, obviously, is Jesus. But there's something interesting about this. in Isaiah 5:1, speaking as God, now I will sing to my well-beloved, a song of my beloved touching his vineyard. My well-beloved, this term's used twice to refer to the people of Israel. Here it refers to the Son. Explicitly. Yet therefore one Son is well-beloved. What is Jesus here? What's the voice from heaven at baptism? This is my Son, my beloved. Okay, same word. It's a further reflection of the remnant theology that I talked about, that Israel, having failed to recognize the Messiah, Jesus has left as the whole people of Israel because he's been rejected by the scribes, the Pharisees, and the people. The tenants, the vine dressers who decide to kill the Son, obviously that's all those who are seeking to kill Jesus. And the others, okay? He will give the vineyard unto others. That's the church. The church is going to become Israel. Have you not read this scripture? The stone which the builders rejected is become the head of the corner. You've heard that before. It's from Psalm 118. Psalm 118 is a Passover song, and they would have heard it, read it, whatever, a lot during the week preceding Passover. It is also the psalm, and I mentioned this earlier, talking about the triumphal entry, from which we find, blessed be he who comes in the name of the Lord, Hosanna in the highest. So Psalm 118 features heavily here. Here are some interesting word things about this passage. In verse 2 of the Isaiah reading, my well-beloved hath the vineyard, that's verse 1. He fenced it and gathered out the stones thereof and planted it with the choicest vine. The Hebrew word for choicest vine in verse 2 is sorek. And it's a name of a high-quality varietal, which gets its name in Hebrew from what gets the name that it's known by, and from the fact that it's juice, and the wine that comes from it is blood red. It's the wine from these grapes, and only these grapes, that could be used in liturgical worship at the temple in the wine libation ritual, which starts in Genesis. Because of its color, the wine was called the blood of the grape, this particular vine, not just any wine. Oh yeah. Oh yes. You remember when I talked about Jacob's blessing and how Judah's destiny was foretold in Jacob's blessing, about the scepter shall not depart from Judah and so forth. Yeah. Well, in verse 11 of that passage from Jacob's blessing, Genesis 49 is this: binding his foal unto the vine, and his ass's colt unto the choice vine. That sorek is the word that's used there again. It's a word that has a lot of history in the minds of the people who are hearing this. The Jews who are hearing this for the first time. Something interesting I found. It's very picky, but I find this stuff and I like it. Actually, this one just occurred to me. Built a tower and made a wine press. And then Jesus said, dig the place for the wine vat. this is very interesting. A wine press is a trough where you walk on the grapes. Okay, that's what it is. To press the juice out. Mark doesn't use a word which really means wine press, which is interesting. They translated wine vat. The word is hypolemon, and it's the only time it occurs in the New Testament. And it properly denotes the wine press is elevated, and then the wine vat is down below. Okay? And there's a trough that runs so that when the juice is pressed out, it runs into the wine vat. This word hypolemon most properly means the trough, not the wine vat itself. Now, why they translate it wine vat, I don't know. But it's very interesting to me because Jesus is the link between
A little bit louder.
Jesus is the link between the divine realities and the earthly realities. And the bridge between them is him and his blood. And I thought maybe that's what Mark meant, but maybe not. Obviously, the translators didn't feel that way. I'm not sure whether or not the fact that at the season he sent to the husbandmen is any kind of reference to the fig tree story. I don't know. But I think it might be. In that when Jesus went to the fig tree, he knew darn well there weren't going to be any figs to eat on that tree. It wasn't the season yet. But the owner of the vineyard had every expectation that he would get some of the fruit that was due to him. Well beloved. Oh, by the way, the stone which the builders rejected, that'll pop up again in Acts. When Peter is called before the Sanhedrin and tried for blasphemy, he uses that in part of his defense. Okay. There's something else I want to tell you. Shoot. Oh well. Okay. All right. Mark verse 12. And they sought to lay hold on him, but feared the people. Here's that thing again, this sense of fear of the mob, fear of what others will do. They sought to lay hold on him, but feared the people, for they knew that he had spoken the parable against them. Well, of course they knew. It's just as plain as a nose on your face. There's no way that they could not have known that this was a parable directed at the religious leadership, and particularly the temple leadership. And they send unto him certain of the Pharisees and of the Herodians to catch him in his words. Now, there's something interesting about this. The Pharisees and the Herodians were the two opposite ends of the spectrum in Judaism. The Herodians were the ones who were sort of, we can be a little bit Greek. It can work out. Don't worry about the gymnasia and the theater. And we shouldn't be so stiff-necked about it. The Pharisees are stone the heretics, So these are not natural allies. But in this case, they both hate Jesus. And when they were come, they say unto him, Master, we know that thou art true and carest for no man. But thou regardest not the person of men, but teachest the way of God in truth. Is it lawful to give tribute to Caesar or not? Let's stop right there. Okay, and we'll talk about the Roman taxation system because it's something I know about. The tax that they're talking about was a tribute tax. The Roman taxation system was nuts, okay? It was almost as crazy as ours. An overview, some scholar, I forget her name at the moment, but some historian made an interesting sort of visual image about this. She said, you should envision the Roman taxation system as being three concentric circles. The outer circle is the border with non-Roman lands. And it's also consisting, obviously, of the last lands to be conquered. So it needs a heavy military presence, and it's not too productive because when the Romans conquered you, it usually messed up your economy pretty good. So those areas in that outer circle probably were net losses financially. It was costing more to keep them than they were getting out of any taxation. The central circle is the second circle is the established provinces. This is where the money came from, okay? This was where there was the heaviest taxation. And the center circle is Italy. Not just Rome, Italy. That's where the money went. Now, there were a plenitude of taxes. The tribute was just one. Some places were exempt from taxation. Some people were exempt from taxation. Sometimes a city, I don't remember ever happening to a whole province, but sometimes a city could be granted exemption from taxation by the Senate for some particular service they had done, usually meaning supporting them in one of their wars of conquest, or resisting an invader, or something like that. But there were taxes. You remember when at the calling of Matthew earlier, or Levi, he was sitting in the gate. There were internal tariffs in the Roman Empire. When you crossed a provincial border, depending on what border it was, you might have to pay a tax. When you went into a city, depending on what city it was, you might have to pay a tax. That's apparently what Matthew was doing. He was collecting taxes on people bringing goods into the city. If you sold a slave, you had to pay a tax. If you freed a slave, you had to pay a tax. If you died, your heirs had to pay a tax. I mean,
did this just apply to the provinces or also to inside Rome?
Some of those things were applied generally, but it was a patchwork. Certain provinces would be relieved of certain things for a while, sometimes, while they needed to recover from bad harvest or whatever. But most of Italy didn't pay any taxes at all. None. Except you had to pay a tax every year on the land that you owned. And if you're an Italian, you had to pay a tax on the land that you owned if it was outside of Italy. Okay. See, I'm telling you, it was nuts. It was as crazy as ours. But there are two other things about the Roman taxation. Not all of it had to be paid in coin. Some of it could be paid, and some of it was expected to be paid in kind. And Rome was dependent to a large degree on grain imports. And some of the provinces, like Egypt, which was very wealthy, paid in grain. So, but this particular tax had political and religious as well as financial implications. The tribute was a tax of 1 denarius. Remember, a denarius is the coin I showed you some weeks ago. It's equivalent to 1 day's pay for a laborer. That's what it's usually spoken of. It was imposed in 6 AD. Now, what happened in 6 AD? Well, after the death of Herod the Great in 4 AD, there were 2 sons, and who each of them believed he should be the next king. And it got nasty real nasty. And the Romans imposed a settlement which named neither of them king. Now I know we speak of the Herod who was assigned to Judea as a king, but he really wasn't. They were ethnarchs. An ethnarch is a Roman word meaning the leader of a certain ethnic group, is the term, within a province. And they had no real authority. They had style. They had what's what I'm looking for. They had an income derived from taxation, and they had a lot of prestige, but they weren't kings. That lasted for all of 2 years, and they were fighting each other. The Romans stepped in and said, "No, forget it. You guys are out totally." The Archelaus was the son who had been in charge of Judea and a little bit more, but we don't care about the rest of it. Judea, Samaria, a little bit more. And that's when they imposed direct Roman rule. From that point on, it was a province. The tax had to be paid in a specific coin. It had to be paid with a Tiberius drachma, a drachma that had been by the current emperor. Not only did it have the emperor's picture on it, the inscription on it was Tiberius Kaiser Divi Augusti Filius Augustus Pontifex Maximus. Tiberius Caesar, the august son of the divine Augustus, high priest. Now, to us, and to a lot of careless translators, as far as I'm concerned, Augustus gets translated as respected, worthy of respect, impressive, something like that. But in Latin, that is not what it means. Augustus is derived from the word augur, A-U-G, not A-U-G-U-R-Y, not A-U, or say A-U-G-U-R, not A-U-G-E-R, not the tool. But the augurs were a group of priests of various divinities. But when it's used without any other qualifier, it usually means the priest of Jupiter, Optimus, and Maximus. Jupiter, the best and greatest. And their primary role was to divine not so much the intention, but the mood, let's say, of the gods about any given question. And they did this by observing the flight of birds and certain other natural phenomena, but that was the big one. Birds and lightning were the big one. What Augustus means is consecrated by augury. In other words, chosen by our gods. We have discerned that Jupiter and all the rest want Augustus to be the princeps, the top guy. So you've got Tiberius Caesar, son of the divine Augustus, and himself consecrated, and high priest. Pontifex Maximus was a Roman office. He was the guy who was the head, the final authority on all religious matters regarding the worship of the gods who protected and advanced Rome. This is so offensive on so many levels if you're Jewish. And you've got to pay this tax. And you know where this tax goes? Well, the Roman treasury was in Rome. It was in the temple of Saturn. But that's not where this got sent. It got sent to Rome. It got sent to the temple of Jupiter, best and greatest.
Ooh.
So you can imagine this is highly offensive to the Jews. And it was intended to be. The Romans were not gentle with people that they conquered. Okay, they were going to rule them for their own good, whether they liked it or not. And usually they didn't. And the Romans rubbed it in that they were a conquered people. The Romans made sure that the people whom they had absorbed into the empire by force or threat of force knew darn well that they were there because the Romans could crush them if they wanted to. So they offended them many times. I think I've mentioned before, one of the most striking coins from this period are the denarii that were minted after the conquest of Judea, called Judea Captus, because that's the inscription on the reverse. And what it shows on the reverse is a weeping woman. Groups of people are always represented by female figures at this period. A weeping woman sitting under a palm tree, and Judea Capta means Judea captured. So every time you handle one of those, it was, the Romans want to know what they can do. They want us to know what they can do. So this tribute, and you also remember the story of the tribute money with St. Peter? Yeah, that was that coin, all right? That's what it was. Had to be. Okay, so is it lawful to give tribute to Caesar or not? They don't mean is it lawful under Roman law, they're talking about Jewish law, all right? Shall we give or shall we not give? But he, knowing their hypocrisy, said unto them, why tempt you me? Bring me a penny, a denarius, that I may see it. Now he knew darn well what it looked like. He's making a point. And they brought it. And he saith unto them, whose is this image and superscription? What's written on it? I just told you what was written on it.
Judea captured.
No. That was later. What was written on it was Tiberius Caesar, son of the divine Augustus, high priest. Well, and Jesus answering saith unto them, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar, and to God the things that are God. This has inspired more, probably, no, I wouldn't say more. It's inspired an awful lot of reading and an awful lot of preaching and an awful lot of consideration. The best thing I read about this, the way to pull it together, Jesus is saying that we are citizens of heaven and earth at the same time. We are citizens of heaven. We're also his citizens of earth. And more than that, we're citizens of one particular part of the earth, depending on where we live. Another point here, as Jesus has just spoken to them about the vineyard and the vineyard being taken away, and he has referenced Isaiah 5, pretty heavily, and Isaiah 5 is predicting the destruction of Jerusalem. Isaiah was talking about it under the Babylonians, and they're going to break down the wall and trod it down and lay it waste, and there shall come up briars and thorns. By the way, that briars and thorns phrase also appears exactly the same words in Hebrew in Adam and Eve being cast out of the garden. And I will lay it waste. So that was a reference to, as there are many prophetic references, to the idea that because they have not followed the law, because they have not attempted to walk as God would have them walk, they're going to be punished, and punished badly. There are many of these promises of blessing on the one hand, cursing on the other. You know, you're blessed if you do your best. You're cursed if you go your own way. They're repeatedly in the prophets One could argue that had the Jews rendered God what he was due, they'd never have to render Caesar anything. That this was a sort of punishment, although I would be more likely to say not a punishment so much as a result of the fact that they had departed from God. And particularly in this case, because notice, how did the Romans step in? They didn't fight a big Jewish army. There were two Jewish armies fighting each other and tearing the country up. And they stepped in and said, quit. You people obviously are not fit for self-government. We'll take care of it. And they did.
Sir?
Notice also in Luke's gospel, in the 23rd chapter of Luke, this is where the temple types go to Pontius Pilate and say, we want, this guy's a bad guy. You ought to crucify him. And they say in verse 2, they began to accuse him, saying, we found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to give tribute to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ, a king. He never forgets. That's a lie. In none of the Gospels does he say, don't pay the tribute. It's always this. Okay? Why do I put this in? Why do I bother bringing Luke at this point? To remind you all that when you're contending with the enemies of truth, I don't care whether it's whatever kind of truth it is, as long as it's truth, it doesn't matter what you say or do. There are people who are enemies of the truth, and they will represent you as wrong even if you're right. They will call evil good and good evil. Do not expect to be able to take people who are enemies of the truth and reason them into recognizing the truth. You cannot do it.
Randall.
Yes, ma'am.
I think the simplest answer as to why Jesus said what he said, render unto Caesar, whose picture is on that,
Right.
is Genesis chapter 1, verse 26.
Image and likeness.
In our image, after our likeness.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'll tell you something
Each
interesting.
of us bears God's image.
I'll tell you something, exactly. And I'll tell you something very interesting about that. The Latin word that's used here for image is character. I can't remember the exact Latin ending, but it's character. And remember how ancient coins were made? They were stamped, right? And the idea is, let me go back a few steps. How far back can I go? I don't want to start with the Pleistocene age. Yeah, okay. The history of coinage, very briefly, people started realizing, you can't really carry 300 cows over to a place 200 miles away easily, and the people over there really they'd trade for cows, but whatever they've got that we want, we can't afford to trade. So, but if we take a cow's worth of metal, usually iron or and carry that over, then we can trade for whatever they want. It'll be a lot easier than driving all those cows. The Latin word for cow is pecus, P-E-C-U-S. The original Roman coins were about this big, and they had a cow stamped on them. That's where the word pecuniary comes from. Okay? So later, and this happened mostly in the East, Greece and farther East. Later, people moved to precious metals because the weight of iron, it's pain. Well, when you cast coins, they're not going to be 100% pure. They'd be too soft. And you want them to be uniform so that you have some way of knowing. The drachma, which becomes, sorry, I forget the exact weight, but it's the same as a denarius, just about. The drachma became the standard coin throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. It was accepted in the Western as well. And when city-states issued drachma, they would put a mark on them. That's it. And that mark said, this was produced by this authority who guarantees that it is the true weight and that it's of a significant purity. So that's why when you see these ancient coins from Greece, almost always they'll have on them a symbol as to where they came. You know the term coals to Newcastle? Mm-hmm. Okay. The Greek equivalent was owls to Athens. The owl was Athena's bird, and that's what they stamped on their drachma. Okay. And drachma, by the way, is also a measure of weight. So, okay. Now, so the character, what stamped on something, says, this is who made it, and this is who guarantees its quality. When you think about that, in terms of what you're talking about, image and likeness of God, that we're stamped out by God. Sometimes I feel stamped on by God, but that's another matter. And, bear in mind, the church used primarily the Latin Bible in the West for a very long time. And that reading became the subject of a significant amount of attention. Image and likeness.
So these coins, were they always true, that you could actually depend upon them?
The Greek ones, pretty much. There were people who counterfeited. There are ancient counterfeits. But pretty much the Greek city-states, they didn't want to lose their validity. The Romans, not so much. Nero debased the currency very heavily with lead. And there were numerous instances of dumbing down the currency. Anybody who pays anybody who's interested in Roman coinage will know that as time went on, the images got cruder and cruder. That's partly because of lack of skilled people, but it's also partly because harder and harder metals were being used because they've messed it up.
Well, we had this in our country too. When they first started having banks in different places, they were making money and supposedly guaranteeing it on that. And then people did not want to trade in certain places because they didn't think they were ever going to get their value back out of that money. It's kind of like it's going on now.
Well,
until they came up with more central money.
Very early though, because I don't want to get into British colonial policy, but British colonial policy about money was very strict, and you weren't allowed to mint. And you had to get special permission to issue any kind of paper money, which was done. But it was complicated. The British did not allow there to be any banks at all in North America. They wanted the Bank of England to be essentially a central bank, which it was. Okay. And they marveled at him. Well, they just, okay, he answered us. But it leaves a lot of unanswered questions, but they didn't do follow-ups, apparently. Then come unto him the Sadducees, which say there is no resurrection. The Sadducees do not believe in the physical resurrection from the dead, like the Pharisees, because they, the Sadducees, accepted only the Pentateuch, the first 5 books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That was scripture as far as they were concerned. Everything else was sort of quasi, but not really. The Pentateuch was the source of all authority for them. And they did not believe, as the Pharisees did, that the oral tradition of the rabbis had any authority at all. Bear that in mind. And they asked him, saying, Master, they're flattering him as usual. Moses wrote unto us, if a man's brother die and leave his wife behind him and leave no children, that his brother should take his wife and raise up seed unto his brother. Now, there were 7 brethren, and the first took a wife, and dying left no seed. And the second took her and died, neither left he any seed. And the third likewise. And the 7 had her and left no seed. Last of all, the woman died also. In the resurrection, they don't believe in the resurrection, okay? Therefore, when they shall rise, whose wife shall he be of them? For the 7 later to wife. Jesus says to them, do you not therefore err because you know not the scriptures, neither the power of God? For when they shall rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels which are in heaven. And as touching the dead that they rise, have you not read in the book of Moses how in the bush God spake unto him, saying, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Jesus is using the Pentateuch. He's telling them, you don't understand. He's not saying, as a Pharisee would say, well, you clearly don't understand the importance of the teachings of Rabbi Duda on this. He's saying, you guys who pretend that all authority is in the Pentateuch don't even know how to read it. This is a slashing attack. He is not the God of the dead, but God of the living. Ye therefore do the error. I've mentioned this before. In these last couple of chapters, Jesus is no longer simply defending himself. He is counterattacking over and over again. And this is a heck of a counterattack. He's saying to these guys whose sole authority derives from the Pentateuch. That's where all the Deuteronomic laws are about temple worship and all that. He's saying, you have messed up. You don't understand what you think you understand. Here's that thing from Deuteronomy that they're quoting. It's called Levirate marriage. It has nothing to do with Levi. It has to do with the Latin word levir, which means brother-in-law. Okay? It says, if brethren dwell together, one of them die and have no child, the wife of the dead shall not marry without unto a stranger. Shall not marry without, meaning outside the family, unto a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go in unto her and take her to him to wife and perform the duty of an husband's brother unto her. Remember, at this period, they were polygamous. So it didn't mean you have to get rid of another wife. And it shall be that the firstborn which she beareth will succeed in the name of his brother which is dead, that his name be not put out of Israel. Continuation of it. And if the man like not to take his brother's wife, you're going to love this bit. Then let his brother's wife go up to the gate unto the elders and say, my husband's brother refuseth to raise up unto his brother a name in Israel. He will not perform the duty of my husband's brother. Then the elders of his city shall call him and speak unto him. And if he stand to it and say, I like not to take her. This is the part you're going to like. Then shall his brother's wife come unto him in the presence of the elders, and loose his shoe from off his foot and spit in his face, and shall answer and say, so shall it be done unto that man that will not build up his brother's house. And his name shall be called in Israel the house of him that hath his shoe loosed. I told you you'd like it.
What's the significance of a shoe being loose? Is it an insult or what?
I'm not really sure, and I did some looking on this, and it appears to have changed a little bit because there's a reference to the book of Ruth. But in that case, what's his name? Ruth's husband.
Boaz.
Pardon me?
Boaz.
Boaz, of course. Boaz takes off his shoe and gives it to her brother-in-law in token that he, Boaz, wants to marry her, which is different. So I don't know why.
It's in token that he's giving up his right.
No,
to
but
marry.
Boaz wasn't giving up his rights.
Excuse me, that the brother-in-law, yes.
But Boaz took off his shoe, and I don't know why. And I'm ashamed to say I was chasing too many rabbits at one time, and I let that one get away. All right, what else have we got here?
Where were you reading from?
Deuteronomy 25, beginning at verse 5.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. There's a lot of weird stuff in the Old Testament. Deuteronomy leads the pack. Trust me. So Jesus is saying more here than just what it appears. Or there's more. He has said more than I've talked about. Let's put it that way. Jesus said unto them, "You're not therefore err, because you know not the Scriptures." And man, that ought to sting for these guys. Neither, meaning neither do you know the power of God. In other words, you don't believe in the resurrection, you don't understand how powerful God is. Because it's obvious that this is not, something that really happened. I mean, come on, what are the odds? And these guys don't even believe in the resurrection. So when they say in the resurrection, whose wife will she be? Come on, they're playing games. And clumsily too. If you knew the power of God, he seems to be saying, when they shall, well, it's pretty obvious. You know neither the power of God, for when they shall rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels which are in heaven. It's a very odd thing to me that a lot of people seem to think that they know what the next life is going to be like, and we don't. I don't say we have no idea, but we don't know. And there are really kind of, let's put it this way, there are two sort of basic schools of thought, all right? Either the next life is like this life, only without the troubles, right? And that's been a very popular, across most cultures, I'd say, that's been the predominant idea. If they believed in a happy afterlife, it was like this life, only without the problems inherent in it. So, many of the Eastern, I don't know about the West, but many of the Eastern American Indian tribes really did use the phrase the happy hunting ground. That's what they knew, hunting. So, yeah, there's going to be lots of game and it'll be easy to catch. It's going to be happy. The Vikings are the best example, I guess. They thought if you went to Valhalla, you drank all day, you fought all day, and then at the close of the day, the dead who'd been killed were raised and the wounded were healed. And then you all got drunk together. This is the best that life had to offer as far as they were concerned, and they were going to have it forever. But the ancient Egyptians, very much. People think of them as a death-obsessed culture. I think that's a little unfair, because all of their representations of the afterlife show people enjoying all of the things that people enjoy in this life. So it's sort of the idea of a continuation of this life, but without the troubles. That's one side. But the other approach is we are both body and spirit. And the earth is earthy. The earth is the body. The earth is where the body lives. The earth is where but the earth is the material side of us. What we do, not only what we do good, what we do bad, what we do we like, what we do that we have to, that's over at death. And whatever awaits in the next realm is purely spiritual. And we can't understand that. We don't really, there's no way we can. I don't consider this off color, but I'm going to tell it anyhow. Gwen's heard this story so many times, she's sick of it. But I think it's the best one I can give you. Little boy asked his mother, very little boy, 7 years old maybe, asked his mother, what is sex? And his mother, trying to explain to him, tells him in some detail the physical action, and he looks utterly puzzled and confused and a little disgusted. And she says, oh, you don't understand. It feels wonderful. How can that feel good? Well, it's like, oh, wait, he says, I got it. You eat chocolate while you're doing that dumb stuff. Well, he understood what chocolate was, but he was not yet equipped to understand sexuality. That's us. We understand what chocolate is, but we're not yet equipped to understand what the next life is going to be like. And the biblical writers knew this. I mean, when you read all the stuff in Revelation, the pearly gates and all that, that's metaphor. That's attempting to express something beyond expression. And what Jesus is saying to them is that they're not willing, they do not understand, they do not know how powerful God is. That whatever the next life is like, it will be so different from this one that aspects of it, well, we don't even know. We just don't know. That great. I don't need to know what the future holds if I know who holds the future. And I believe as strongly as anybody I know that they're in the resurrection, our resurrection. But I don't pretend to have any idea what it's like. I just expect it'll be wonderful. I trust God that it'll be what it should be. The angels, of course, are sexless because they are created directly by God. They're creatures. And they, so that in that reference, we are like the angels. This reference here to Moses hearing God say, I'm the God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob. This gets referenced, not exactly directly, but the concept gets referenced when Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am. And one of the scribes came. Now, the scribes, remember, the scribes were primarily Pharisees. And I've talked to you about the scribes, and they were very respected. The scribes were on a level with doctors of the law because their task was so demanding and it was so precise and had to be. I was rereading a little bit about it. They fascinate me, by the way, because they managed without anything other than the tools available to them. They managed to maintain the purity of the script for centuries in hand copying it. And that didn't happen in most places with most things. I just read they had to copy the scriptures on vellum made from made from lambs that were specially dedicated for that and sacrificed in the temple for it. And it's very expensive to make a copy of even a single book, particularly the Pentateuch, because they're long. And at the final inspection, if 2 letters were touching, they destroyed the whole thing. It had to be absolutely physically perfect. So it was very demanding. And every time they came to the point where they had to write Yahweh, they had to stop and wash their hands and wash all their instruments before they wrote it. This was a demanding task. So the scribes were people who were well compensated and very respected. And having heard them reasoning together, well, they weren't reasoning together. They were arguing. And perceiving that he had answered them well, and liked what Jesus said, asked him, which is the first commandment of all? And Jesus answered him, the first of all the commandments is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. That's from the Shema. That's like it's from Deuteronomy. It's repeated in the synagogue over and over. It's like the creed of Israel, of Israel. It's called the Shema because the first word is Shema, hear. Shema Yisrael. The Lord our God is one God, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. This is the first commandment. And the second is like, namely this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. There is none other commandment greater than these. Interestingly, you remember when we talked about, I think the rich young ruler, we talked about when Jesus told him commandments, and I told you about the fact that Moses always shown with 2 tablets, and one has the commandments that relate to one's duty to God, and the tablets that relate to the duty to other human beings, or what God, how He wants us to act like towards other human beings. Sort of interesting that Jesus sort of repeats that duet in his 2 commandments.
I wave.
And the scribe said unto him, Well, Master, thou hast said the truth. For there is one God, and there is none other but He. And to love Him with all the heart, and with all the understanding, and with all the soul, and with all the strength, and to love his neighbor as himself is more than all whole burnt offerings and sacrifices. Well, he's a Pharisee. Remember, they didn't particularly like the Sadducees anyhow, but that's what he says. And when Jesus saw that he answered discreetly, he said unto him, Thou art not far from the kingdom of God. The words, this is interesting. I don't know why they translate this discreetly, but that is one of the meanings. The word in Greek is nonekos. It means wisely or prudently or discreetly. And it's a compound word in Greek. It comes from nous, meaning mind, and echo, meaning having a mind. So that doesn't necessarily come across to me as meaning discreetly, but that is a use for it. I just found that an interesting word thing. Thou art not far from the kingdom of God. Yeah, he's standing close enough to Confucius to talk to him, so there's that. But he's not there yet. And Jesus answered and said, while he taught in the temple. So he's turned away from the scribe. Now he's talking to whoever's listening. How say the scribes that Christ is the son of David? For David himself said by the Holy Ghost. Now, let's stop right there. One thing that needs to be understood is that David was considered a prophet as well as a king. And the Psalms were considered a book of prophecy. I know you've heard 1,000 times that the Psalms are the hymn book of ancient Israel. Well, they were, but they were also considered to be prophetic. And that's why the early church uses them so much. And even through, even through the medieval period, the Psalms are very prominent in public worship. And all of the monastic hours included readings from Psalms. The Psalms are meditated on. The Psalms were seen as showing forth much deeper truths than what was on the surface, and as predicting things that would happen, and in some cases had happened. This psalm, and you've heard it before, is Psalm 110. The Lord said unto my Lord, sit thou at my right hand until I make thine enemies thy footstool. The Lord shall send the rod of thy strength out of Zion, rule there in the midst of thine enemies. I imagine the Jews would understand that one today. The people of Israel. So when he says, for David himself said by the Holy Ghost, David speaking as a prophet. The Lord said to my Lord, sit thou in my right hand till I make thine enemies thy footstool. So quoting Psalm 110. David, therefore, himself calleth him Lord, and whence is he then their son? And the common people heard him gladly. He's talking to them about the Messiahship. He's given them all the clues in the world that he's talking about himself. You've got to believe that a lot of them are catching on, beginning to catch on. At least I've got to believe it. And he said unto them in his doctrine, his teaching, sorry, I lost it. Beware of the scribes which love to go in long clothing and love salutations in the marketplaces and the chief seats in the synagogues and the uppermost room at feast, which devour widows' houses and for a pretense make long prayers. These shall receive greater damnation. Let's start from the top. Long clothes, long robes, some translations say. Remember, if you're a working person, you might, you had a mantle, which is sort of like a bathrobe. It's the thing all the kids wear when they do nativity plays. But if you didn't, you wore a tunic, which was, I've explained, a tunic is sort of like a really long T-shirt, short sleeves usually, longer in the back than in the front. It came down to about the knees in the front, a little longer in the back. That was working class clothing. The point is, you can't work unless you bind up your loins. And the fact that they love to go in long clothing. I am not a manual worker. I don't have to work with my hands. I don't have to do anything tough. I can dress like this. Sort of like in the 19th century when, men's suits got impossible to do anything in other than sit at his desk. You can't work in one. All right? And love salutations in the marketplaces. The scribes, salutations marks of respect, formal marks of respect, like salutes in the military, and the chief seats in the synagogues, and the uppermost room at feast. These are marks of status and privilege. Status in the religious community, which meant everybody, all Jews, and also privilege, which devour widows' houses. I don't know. I don't know precisely what he's talking about here. Obviously, I don't know. I couldn't figure it out. It didn't make much sense to me, the things that are
It's
read.
collusion. They collude to exploit the vulnerable. And
Well, yes, it does mean that, but I don't know exactly why he talks about widows' houses. I don't know.
I know a specific example. My parents lived in Bogota, Colombia many years ago, and the government was very corrupt there. And they had a maid working for her who at one time, she and her husband had owned a small farm. And when he died, various powerful men would take her to court and say, well, that they stole this little piece of land, until finally she had nothing.
Okay.
There's also the point where some of the people who were made the people like Isaiah and so on were complaining that the rich people or the people at the temple were saying that I give my property to the temple,
Right.
and therefore nothing is left for my parents.
We talked about that in Mark earlier.
Yes.
Yeah, that could well be it. Sorry, thank you. That's good. For a pretense, make long prayers. Yeah. I ran across a quote from a guy I'd never heard of. He was 20th century Baptist named G. Campbell Morgan. Have you ever heard of him? I don't know what else he said, but he said this, and by gosh, it's good. Well, he wrote it actually. When a man is away from his wife and the journey is short, the letters are short. The farther he is from his wife, the longer the letters become. Morgan said that some people must be a long way from God because their prayers were so long. I found that very nice. I like that. And having sat through a lot of very long Baptist prayers, I wish other Baptists had read it. And Jesus sat over against the treasury and beheld how the people cast money into the treasury, and many that were rich cast in much. This is, you remember how a lot of churches used to have in the narthex a poor box?
Yeah.
Which was a box, and anything that was put in there was supposed to go to, yeah, okay. Well, that's what they had in the temple. It was a chest, a big one, with a slot in the top. And it was for the relief of the poor, and that was all it was supposed to be used for. Okay? And that was considered a gift to God for the, to be used for the relief of the poor. And people would put coins in it. So you could tell how much they were putting in because a heavy coin makes a difference from a light coin, right? Okay. And many that were rich cast in much. And by God, they did it where everybody could see them too, because it's right out there in the open. This is not inside a building. It's in the courtyard just outside the treasury. And there came a certain poor widow, and she threw in 2 mites, which make a farthing, 2 lepta. Okay. This is a lepta, or lepton. It's called a pruta in Aramaic. Lepton is the Greek. This is the smallest coin that was in circulation. The Romans had some interesting ideas about mints. The chief mint was in Rome, but there were mints in a number of places. There were even traveling mints that went with the army to take looted silver and turned into coins. And, oh gosh, where is it? Arles. No, not Arles. Gwen, where's the Maison Carré?
Oh, and
Come on, somebody else
I'm
has been
working
to
on it.
Provence.
I'm working on it.
Well, anyhow, the Maison Carré, which is the building that was the inspiration, Thomas Jefferson's inspiration for the design of the capital of Virginia. The Maison Carré is in a certain town in Provence, which will not come to me. And all over that town, you see the town symbol. This is in southern France, okay? It's a palm tree and a crocodile in chains.
Name.
Nîmes, thank you.
I had to look it up.
That's in Nîmes. Why? Because one of Mark Antony's legions that had served in Egypt under Mark Antony, when they were what is called shoot, I can't think of the word anyhow. They came to the end of their time of service. They were settled in Nîmes.
they were
given land
discharged.
around Nîmes. And that was the image that he had put on his coins, was the crocodile and the palm tree. Okay?
Shame.
So the Romans, for the Romans, coinage had some religious significance, had a lot of political significance. I think it's true that it was really the first use of mass communication. They changed the coinages frequently, not the weights or the names. They changed those over centuries, but they changed the designs to reflect whatever message the emperor wanted to get out. So that was the silver coinage and the very, very rare gold coinage. But lesser coinage, bronze coinage, could be set up by anybody. Well, not anybody, but any Roman official. And the pruta, the lepton, the mite, was done all over, sometimes in bronze, sometimes in copper, sometimes as an alloy. And I brought this one to show you because, unlike all of them, this one was actually signed. We know who it was. This was made by Pontius Pilate. That may well be the very type that the widow dropped in. Was it worth anything? Almost nothing. Remember, the denarius is a day's wage for a laborer. It takes 64 of these to make one denarius.
Wow.
So it's a very, very, very small amount. Farthing is a quadrans. It's a slightly larger, also not silver coin. And he called unto his disciples and saith unto them, Verily I say unto you, believe this. Okay, verily I say unto you, this poor widow hath cast more in than all they which have cast into the treasury. For all they did cast in of their abundance, but she of her want did cast in all that she had, even all of her living. You know, this is like the eye of the camel passing through the eye of the needle, hard for a rich man to enter heaven. This would be not uncommon thought at this time and place, particularly among the Gentiles, who very much saw their relationship to the gods as a quid pro quo. In fact, one of the sacrificial phrases that was used by the Romans was, "I give that you may give." In other words, it's a quid pro quo, and they did not see their gods as being necessarily beneficent. They needed to be appeased, and they needed to be bribed. And obviously, if all you're giving him is a little chunk of pot metal, and this other guy is giving him a big chunk of silver, well, obviously he's going to listen to the other guy. But that's not what Jesus says. He sees it very differently. And I think there's there's a meaning beyond this, at least for me. And, this is more preaching than Bible study, but you get what you get. I very much wish that I were better at a whole lot of things. I wish I were a better scholar. I wish I were a better preacher. I certainly wish I were a better liturgist. And I wish I were better as a pastor. I don't have an abundance of any of those gifts. But I'll use what I got as well as I can. And I think there's something here about that I think God is perhaps more interested in the willingness with which we give and use what we have than he is in how much it is. I certainly hope so. And with that, we come to the end of the chapter. Now, okay, I want to give y'all an early warning about something. This is really early. We've got a couple more weeks here. We want to finish more stuff, so that's clear. On the 22nd, we're leaving for Greece, and we won't be back until the 6th. Well, we leave on the 5th. Do we get home on the 5th?
Yeah.
Okay.
22nd of May.
May, yeah. So between the 22nd of May and the 6th of June, wait a minute, what day of the week is that?
It's a Thursday, I think.
Thursday, okay. We won't be here. So my intention is to let this go into recess and then pick it up again after I get back.
Sure.
Because I know it's a long break, but when I started this, I had no idea how long it was going to take. I didn't know I was going to wind up doing it a chapter at a time. And I didn't know how much I would find that interested me that I wanted to talk about, frankly. So be forewarned. Be forewarned that from the 22nd of May.
Coins is for the revolution against George.
I had George III penny and at his marriage because he
This world. It doesn't want to leave this world either.
Did they take the old things?
and there were the other one was the Romans were very successful in certain ways. They were very successful in homogenizing the empire. They were still a patchwork, but it was a patchwork that could talk to each other and that could do business with each other. And there was the Romans are not all good and they're all bad. And people romanticize them, and I try not to do that. But also people demonize them, and I certainly don't do that. I admire their achievements in many respects.
So this is sort of similar then to postage, right? It's too
To
bad
what?
we don't have stamps.
Postage
If you go out of country, you still use whatever you would have, and I guess if they were sending to you, would use whatever they had, but it's not going to be worth the same amount of.
I'm sorry, I'm not following. No, you can't take American stamps to South Africa.
No, but if you're sending something to South Africa, you'd use
From the
American
United
stamps.
States.
Use U.S. currency.
And if they were sending it to you, they would be using yours, and whatever it cost you to buy a stamp in American money, and then it costs whatever they had in their own money. But those are not necessarily equivalent.
No, they would not be
monies.
equivalent.
But they are
The best comparison or between stamps, mail type stamps, postage stamps, and Roman money is that we use stamps to get out messages too. You know, you use stamps to celebrate things, you use stamps to urge people to do things. They change. Well, the Romans use their coinage that way. I don't have a lot of Roman coins. I didn't really specialize in them. But I do have a few. One of the really interesting ones was issued by an emperor known as Philip the Arab. Yeah, I know you never heard of him. He's pretty obscure. But he was emperor for the year which marked the 1000th anniversary of the legendary founding of Rome. And that's what the coin depicts. That's really cool.
Sort of like our bicentennial coin, only much longer.
Yes, like the bicentennial quarters. Very good. Oh, dear me. Well, thank you all very much. It
Thank
is,
you.
Thank you.
and
We're talking about putting out a new,
Have a great trip.
Oh, I'm not leaving yet. Don't worry.
It's quite a
I
big
told you it was an early.
thing, and putting a black one, I think from yeah, one of the,
He'll be leaving on the 22nd, Wednesday.
No,
what denomination was that? Do you remember?
no, I'm sorry.
What denomination Bill was they thinking?
Good question, Jerry.
When are you painting over?
No, I've got, we're supposed to be group of 15, we're actually 14 now. Because one person had to drop out, but, you know, so 12 of those are, no, not quite. 10 are students. And then there's a husband, and then there's a friend who, you know, he's